ตรงตึกนี้ก็จะมีแบบแม่น้ำนะคนชอบมาถ่ายรูปตรงนี้ชัวร์ตรงนี้ก็จะมีคนมานั่งเรือทัวร์นะเรือสวยมากตอนนี้ก็กำลังจะไปนั่งเรือนะสิงก็มารอเรือตรงนี้นะบรรยากาศรอเรือมาไม่กี่นาทีนะน้ำแบบสีเขียวสวยมากก็ต้องซื้อตั๋วออนไลน์มาก่อนนะคะแล้วก็เดินลงไปก็มารอเรือมากันนะคะตอนนี้ก็มารอขึ้นเรือนะคะต้องจองมาก่อนคนละ 1,500 บาทนะก็จะได้ไปขึ้นเรือเวลาที่ขึ้นเรือก็จะประมาณ1 ชั่วโมงครึ่งนะและแล้วก็ถึงเวลาที่เราจองเรือ5 โมงเย็นนะคะเรือมาแล้วเดี๋ยวก็ต้องขึ้นไปแล้วก็เลือกที่นั่งกันนะ
Chicaco.
We also have more than enough life jackets for everybody on board. They're located in the wood top benches there at the stern on the top deck. Beautiful because up here it's sunny, it's breezy, it feels fantastic. The water's out.
I worked here. If you don't know anything about architecture, it's all pretty to look at and it's interesting to learn about. And we'll talk about some Chicago history as well. That's where Chicago began about 240 years ago. So remember Ferrari. Directly to our right is the Trump International Hotel and Tower. It was finished in 2009. It was finished in 1973, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and it is international style. International style architecture is defined with dark steel, rectangular patterns, and minimal ornamentation. Now, international style was pioneered by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and he was a professor right here in Chicago. You see, his philosophy was that architects should be as practical as possible, or rather, buildings should be as practical as possible for the people inside them.
That's where I had dinner when
now,
I stayed down here.
Was a professor,
right there, Levinsky.
But not all of his students ended up liking rectangles. Directly to our right, these two circular towers to our right are Marina City. Marina City is by Bertrand Goldberg. These two circular towers we're passing. Goldberg was inspired by nature. He said there are no right angles in nature. He wanted to build round and natural looking shapes. In addition, you might have noticed those parking ramps. We'll get to see them again behind us in a moment. Here's the thing. When Marina City went up in the 60s, not many people lived in downtown Chicago. So you can see those parking ramps behind us again there, those winding spiral parking ramps. In order to entice residents to move downtown, Goldberg, it had its own grocery store, movie theater, bowling alley, skating rink, marina, and those parking ramps. Having seen the winding spiral parking ramps of Marina City, you might have gotten nervous imagining cars falling off and into the river. Don't worry, that's only happened twice. That's true, but the whole truth is that it never happened on accident. Both times were stunts. Once for Steve McQueen's movie The Hunter, and the other was for an auto insurance commercial. Now, directly to our right, this brick building is from 1914. This red brick building is the Reed Murdoch Center. It was designed by George Nimitz to be a grocery warehouse back when the river was our port. ships would come in from Lake Michigan and dock at warehouses like that to load and unload goods. Now, it's a mixed-use office building today, but it remains a window into the river's more industrial path. The weather's clear today, so I think we'll be able to spot it. If you look a bit forward and up to the right, closely, you might be able to make out that there's actually a stone building here. Exactly. Extra large and in charge on the right side of our boat. This is the Merchandise Mart. The Merch Mart was finished in 1932, designed by Graham Anderson Probst and White in Art Deco style. Art Deco style is defined with vertical lines, setbacks toward the top, and geometric ornamentation throughout. Now, the Merchandise Mart was the largest building in the world in 1932, 4.2 million square feet, 400,000 square meters of floor space. It was bankrolled by Marshall Field of Marshall Field's department stores to consolidate as many. Finally, up till 2008, the U.S. Postal Service gave it its own zip code. That was 60654. Now, directly to our right, these two glass towers are both by Pelly Clark Pelly Architects. The one on the right is residential, and the one on the left is the new Salesforce Tower, all office space and still under construction internally. It should be completed later this year. Now, if we take a break from looking up and we just look around here, right here is where the three branches of the Chicago River meet. The north branch is to our right, the south branch is to our left, and the main branches of the river meet is called Wolf Point. And long ago, it's where Chicago got its place in there, in the way they refer to it, which they also called Chicago, which became Chicago. So it came from the name of that smelly onion species that in the summer heat would ripen and stink. So New York is the Big Apple, and now you finally know that Chicago is the smelly onion. All right, we're going to bounce to our left next. Coming up next, looking on the left side of the boat, in front of us and to the left, this red brick building ahead of us and to the left is Fulton House. It's the oldest building we'll talk about today. It was built in 1898, designed by Frank Abbott as a cold storage warehouse. So it had brick walls, originally 3 feet or a meter thick, to keep perishable goods cool inside. Now notice the starfish on the walls and the portholes on the top. You see, it was remodeled by architect Harry Weiss. And Harry Weiss likes boats. He likes to put nautical theming on his architecture, in that case the starfish and the portholes. And here to our left, sticking to the left, this next building is a Harry Weiss original. This row of 4 townhomes with sloping roofs are the Chicago River Cottages from 1988 by Harry Weiss. Porthole windows, sloping roofs, and metallic spiral staircases like you'd find on ships. And folks, after this bridge, I want you to see this. Because if you look to the left and behind us above the bridge, the 2 sloping roofs of the river cottages resemble the sails of sailboats racing each other across a lake. It's a more Harry Weisian nautical theming. Now let's bounce to our right, folks, because on the right side of the boat, this long building with long rows of windows is the East Bank Club. The East Bank Club was built in 1979. It's a high-end exclusive fitness facility. That means expensive gym. Being a high-end gym in Chicago, Barack and Michelle Obama around many times, the windows, though, are not original to the design. The windows are not original to the design. It was built in, because in the 70s, people were not generally interested in looking at the Chicago River. Back then, the river was dirtier and smellier, and we had lots of weirder things than us floating around in it. But after the Clean Water Act was passed in the 70s, we worked hard to clean up our waterways, and windows like that were added to buildings that lined the river. Before those windows were added, it was an example of what we thought of as back to the river architecture. The river used to be lined with those brick and concrete buildings with no windows overlooking the water. Now, if we look to our left, you'll see that interesting greenhouse. No one's ever lived there either. That greenhouse there is called a bridge house. There's one on the right as well. It houses the controls that lift the drawbridges, although the Grand Avenue Bridge right behind us doesn't get lifted much anymore. We'll talk about that later on. Now, after the Ohio Street Bridge coming up, we're going to look up to our right forward and up to the right. Now the Ohio Street Bridge is interesting because it says Ohio Street on it, but this is not really a street bridge. That's why it's so high up. This is actually an expressway feeder into the north side of downtown Chicago. But anyway, after the bridge, we're going to look forward and to the right. All right, so ahead of us and to the right, there's a glass tower with white steel beams pointing up the wall in a chevron pattern. That's Erie on the Park. And to the right of Erie on the Park is a glass tower with white balconies that resemble scaffolding. That's Kingsbury on the Park. Erie and Kingsbury are from 2002 by Lucien Lagrange. They were Chicago's first examples of European industrial style architecture, which is defined as appearing incomplete or under construction, even though they are both complete. Now, in front of us and to the right, there's a blue glass tower with concrete corners going up the height of the building. That blue glass tower is the Montgomery. Now, the Montgomery was built in 1971, designed by Minoru Yamasaki. It's residential today, it's all condos, but originally it was a corporate headquarters. It was the corporate headquarters of what? Montgomery Ward's, exactly, heard it right away. Montgomery Ward's catalogs, founded here in about 1880 by Mr. Aaron Montgomery Ward. We'll talk about them more in a bit, but first, let's look directly to our right. If you look directly to the right, way in the distance, there's a black tower with two white antennas. Way in the distance to our right, black tower, two white antennas. That's the John Hancock Center, 1969 by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Okay. Aaron Montgomery Ward here in Chicago in about 1880 was the largest retailer in the United States, sometimes even the world, at various points in the 20th century. They never owned a single brick and mortar store in their heyday. They were only a catalog mail order retailer. Now, let's see here. So, this building here, this light-colored building with these dark balconies hanging off the wall, this was the original headquarters to Montgomery Ward. It was built in well, not the original, but this building was originally the headquarters of Montgomery Ward. Built in 1912, designed by Schmidt, Gardner, and Martin architects. And after the next bridge on the right, the huge building coming up ahead of us to the right was the old main warehouse by Montgomery Ward, also designed by Schmidt, Gardner, and Martin architects, and built in 1912. Now, after this bridge, if you look up and behind us to the right, right after this bridge, there's a green sculpture up on the roof of the building we passed. Up and behind us to the right, there's a green statue up there. That is the Spirit of Progress lighting the way. It's from 1893 by Augustus St. Gaudens, although that's actually a replica that's been there since the 1920s on that old headquarters to Montgomery Ward. Now, getting back to this old warehouse, this huge building over a quarter-mile long from 1912, the old warehouse from Montgomery Ward's, stood abandoned for a couple years from 2002, when Montgomery Ward's went out of business. Think of that, they stayed in business all the way from 1880 to 2002, but then they finally went out of business. Anyway, when Montgomery Ward's went out of business, this old building here stood mostly abandoned until 2004. When Groupon became the main owner of the building and remodeled it extensively, all of the space, even the space they weren't going to use, so they could lease it out. And in the process of remodeling this huge old warehouse, they found about 300 pairs of old roller skates. Now, those skates were not gifts that never got shipped from the catalog. Montgomery Ward's was always innovating into how to most efficiently operate and encourage their employees to skate from end to end of their quarter-mile long warehouse. Now, that actually was a pretty common practice back in the day. It wasn't only Montgomery Ward's to do that. Pretty common in the shipping and warehouse industry back then. The United States had gained a more substantial hold on the land and built Fort Dearborn. Fort Dearborn was a wooden military outpost built right across the river from DuSable's trading post in that marshland. And being the U.S. government's first presence here, Fort Dearborn is represented by a piece of a symbol of Chicago. You may have noticed the flag of Chicago. We are not exactly subtle about it. It's a white flag with 2 blue horizontal stripes and 4 red stars in a horizontal row. The 2 blue stripes represent the Chicago River and Lake Michigan. Went out to milk her cow, Daisy. Daisy the cow got excited, knocked over the lantern in the barn, and a third of the city burned to the ground. That is the legend of Mrs. O'Leary's cow, how the Great Chicago Fire began. Now, like all good legends, there's a kernel of truth there. But it's not the whole truth, and we'll talk about it later. For now, just know that the fire is real, and it's our second star on the flag, and it was devastating. Now, after the Great Fire of 1871, we were determined to rebuild, and we did. 20 years later, the United States announced its intent to host a World's Fair. World's Fairs were the global events. Millions of people from around the world would travel to this World's Fair, and the cities of the United States, all eager to prove themselves on the world stage, lobby Congress fiercely to be selected as the fair's host. Chicago wants to prove we're back and better than ever from after our fire, and we send our longest-winded, most abrasive politicians to Washington. They are up against... All right. So it is time for me to continue, and I think I'm going to talk about exactly what most of you want me to talk about, directly to our right. Directly to our right, there is a glass building with an alarmingly narrow base. This is 150 North Riverside Plaza. It's by Getz Partners from 2017, and here's how it stays upright. These diagonal steel beams above us focus its weight to its central core, and inside the top of the tower, I have a relentless tickle in my throat. Anyway, inside the top of the tower, there are 150,000 gallons, or 400,000 liters of water in a mass damper system. When wind blows against the building, water in tanks on tracks is shifted against the blow of the wind to balance it out. Now, it would stay upright without the mass damper, but it prevents it from swaying nauseatingly on windy days, and actually mass dampers are quite common. A lot of skyscrapers have shiftable weights near their tops. Now let's bounce to our left. Directly to our left, this glass tower is Bank of America Towers from 2021. These shiny diagonal supports along the river are meant to remind you of the diagonal undersides of 150 North Riverside, right behind us that we just mentioned. These 2 glass towers are both by Getz Partners, meant to be unified in style with these diagonal elements they share along the river. We're going to stick to our left. On the left side of the boat in the direction of travel, this is one of my favorites. This is the Civic Opera Building. The Civic Opera Building is from 1928 by Graham Anderson Probst and White Architects. It is home of the second largest opera auditorium in the United States, 3,500 seats behind this big wall labeled for your convenience. The building as a whole is Art Deco style, vertical lines, setbacks toward the top. And the whole thing resembles a giant throne. It has 2 armrests and a backrest, and the seat faces west. People have theorized that 20th century railroad magnate Mr. Samuel Insull, who bankrolled its construction and lived in the penthouse at the top for a year until he went bankrupt, wanted the Opera House to be a throne overlooking his railway business empire in the western United States. Maybe. But the truth is, Graham Anderson, Probst and White probably designed those narrow sections independently of him for a practical reason, cross-ventilation. Letting the breeze easily cross through the windows was very important before air conditioning was common. Now, let's bounce to our right. On the right side of the boat, below street level, we have the train shed at Chicago Union Station. Right here at eye level is this Metra train in the distance to our right. Metra is our commuter rail system that thousands of Chicagolanders use every day to get between the city and the suburbs. In addition, Chicago Union Station is Amtrak's 3rd busiest station in the United States overall. You can see some people getting on the Metra train to our right there. Now, Chicago Union Station, this is the train shed where the platforms are, where passengers get on and off it. All of these, in front of us and up to the right, there is a short building. It doesn't look very big. A short building with black steel X's along the walls. That was a financial trading floor, the Midwest Commodities Exchange, ahead of us and to the right with the X's on the walls, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, with lead structural engineer Dr. Fazler Rahman Khan. Now, Dr. Fazler Khan developed these tubular X's to support the roof using the walls and thus avoid using pillars inside, which would have caused visual obstruction across the trading floor. It was a very important piece of architectural engineering, very innovative, and today it is both a bakery and a gym, designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill lead engineer Dr. Fazler Khan. Now, after this bridge on the right, this green glass building is green to match the greenish color of the river, and it curves to match the bend in the river. It was designed by James. Directly to our right is the old post office. The old post office was the Central Post Office of Chicago. It was built in 1932, designed by Graham Anderson Probst and White. It is Art Deco style. Art Deco style architecture, vertical lines set back in the middle there. Now the old post office has a highway going through the first floor of it here. The tunnel that this expressway goes through is original to the post office's design. Graham Anderson Probst and White designed the post office in anticipation of this expressway eventually getting built right through it. The post office was completed in 1932, the highway in 1950. And finally, the last thing about the post office, folks, that you may find interesting, the largest post office, not in the United States, but in the world in 1932. Even though Chicago has never been the largest city in the United States, let alone the world, there's a reason. And it goes a bit beyond our location as to why Chicago had the biggest post office in the world. What reason do you think that was? Not exactly. Catalogs. We were the mail order retail capital of the world. Montgomery Ward's, Sears and Roebuck, Marshall Fields and Spiegel were all founded here in Chicago. Others like J.C. Penney operated distribution centers in the city to take advantage of our central location for nationwide shipping. Up until the late 20th century, all those catalog orders were passing through the largest post office in the world that we just sailed by. Now, for the young folks on the boat, a catalog is, if you imagine Amazon.com printed as a book. Somehow it would get into your mailbox, you'd flip through the pages, grab the telephone off the wall, and call the company to tell them which products you wanted. Those products would arrive, not with 24-hour overnight shipping, but somewhere from 2 to 6 weeks. And folks on the boat, a phone book is, now I'll move on, but the Postal Service moved out of the old post office in 1997. Directly to our right, behind the trees, is the new main post office, built in 97. Not much to look at from the river, but it of course remains a critical piece of the Postal Service's network. And the old post office is a mixed-use office building today with an elaborate rooftop garden. And of course, the trivia is, this weekend is of course the busiest is River City. It's from 1986 by Bertrand Goldberg. Goldberg, as we mentioned before, liked these round and his big residential buildings with lots of amenities and public space inside them, because Goldberg's philosophy of residential architecture was that it should allow for the formation of communities within it. For instance, River City that we just passed there has over an acre of indoor public. Right in front of us is the one movable bridge in Chicago that is not a Bascule Trunnion style drawbridge. Directly ahead of us, and it'll be on the right side of the boat as we turn around, is the Canal Street Railroad Bridge, a vertical lift bridge, the oldest operational vertical lift bridge in the United States. It was built in 1986, and dozens of trains a day still go over it. Now, this one is raised the most often because it sits lower than the other bridges in town, but we also still lift the other drawbridges that we've gone under today. We typically lift all the drawbridges on the main branch and south branches of the river on Wednesdays and Saturdays in spring and fall. In fact, this coming Saturday, if you're still going to be in town, this Saturday should be another one. All right, it is time for me to continue. And I have to dive right back in because if I don't dive right back in, I'm going to miss my favorite building to talk about. So I hope that you I hope that you can hear me for this one. It's our black roof silver statue directly to our right. That's the Chicago Board of Trade building. It was built in 1930. It's one of my favorite buildings to talk about because, fun fact, it was the tallest building in Chicago for 25 years, from 1930 until 1955. It's Art Deco style by Halliburton and Root, and it is Art Deco style. I already said that. Art Deco style is defined, remember, vertical lines and setbacks. You can see both of those from there. Oh, and finally, one last thing about it in a moment. Is meant to be the Roman goddess Ceres, goddess of agriculture and abundance, because the Board of Trade itself is an agriculture, futures, and commodities exchange. But we better move on, because in front of us and up to the right is the tallest building in the city of Chicago. That huge black steel building with with bronze windows and two white antennas on top. That dark steel tower with bronze tinted windows and two white antennas on top. That is the tallest building in the city of Chicago. The name of it is spelled W-I-L-L-I-S, pronounced Sears Tower. Its original name was Sears Tower. Its official name today is Willis Tower, but in our hearts, for the most part, it remains Sears Tower. Now, I know you think I missed it. Don't worry, we're going to get another view of it. So keep your eyes up and to the right. Structural engineer for the project, specifically for the Sears Tower. Another important innovation from Dr. Fosway Khan. Now, finally its name. The original owner and main tenant of the building was the headquarters of Sears department stores. Sears moved out and sold it in the 90s, and the new owner, Blackstone Realty Group, kept the name Sears Tower until they got desperate for cash in 2002. And along came the Willis Insurance Group of London, England, offering huge sums of money for the name of the building, hence Willis Tower. Blackstone still owns the building. Willis Insurance Group only owns the naming rights to it. And Willis Insurance is an old company. They were one of the brokers that insured the Titanic all those years ago. Most of us still call it the Sears Tower. Some call it the Willis Tower. And whichever you call it, my heart will go on. I just about forgot to tell you that, but it's all coming back to me now. Anyway, we're going to bounce to our left. After this bridge on the left, we're going to look to our left. This limestone-clad building directly to our left is 2 North Riverside Plaza. It's by Halliburton and Root from 1929 in Art Deco style. Look at the clock directly to our left, and down and to the right from the clock is an engraving captioned "An Ancient Scribe." There are lots of writing-themed carvings all around that building because it was originally the home of the Chicago Daily News, one of our former major newspapers. Now, it's Art Deco style, and it was the first building built directly over the railroad on the west side of the river. Bouncing ahead, in front and up to the left, look at that white steel X sitting on the roof of this gray building right after the bridge and up to our left. Those white crisscrossing beams on the roof are there because the south end of this building is built over a dense section of switching tracks, which made it impossible to lay lots of support on the ground to hold the building up because of the railroad underneath it. So instead, the south end of that building is hanging from the trusses on the roof rather than being supported from the ground up. It was built in 1990, designed by Perkins and Will. It's been owned by the Boeing Company in 2002, but it was originally built to be the headquarters of a significantly more down-to-earth company. It was originally the headquarters of Morton Salt. Moving on. Now, if you look to our right, here's Starbucks. Now, the thing about Starbucks is that there was a time when the only Starbucks in the world were in Seattle and Chicago. Chicago is the first city Starbucks expanded to outside Seattle, Washington. Now, directly to our right, This red brick building is the Great Lakes Building. It's from 1912 by Hollibird and Roots. It stands on the location where in 1860 there was a temporary convention center called the Wigwam, which hosted the convention that nominated Abraham Lincoln to run for president, right where that brick building stands today. We're crossing over Wolf Point for our third and final time. By the way, if you're wondering about the name Wolf Point, truth and wolf, but the truth is, I think someone just thought it sounded cool and everyone else agreed. That being said, the name Wolf Point for this junction in the river does predate Chicago, or at least predates Chicago being an important city. So it is older than the name Chicago, Wolf Point. Okay. Now, directly to right, we have this green glass building. This green glass building with a curved shape. Look at the clouds in the sky reflected in those windows. This is 333 West Wacker Drive. It's by Cohen, Pedersen, and Fox from 1983, and it is a great example of contextualism, matching the surroundings. Green glass, green river, bend in the building, bend in the river where it's built. Also, 333 West Wacker is where Ferris Bueller's dad's office is. At Ferris Bueller's day off, Mr. Bueller looks out one of those green windows to the parade on the street below. All right. Well, let's take a break from looking up because I'm about to trip on my chair. No. Anyway, if you look below eye level on the right side of the boat, this is, of course, the Chicago Riverwalk. The Riverwalk is a relatively new addition to our cityscape. It's only about 20 years old. It was principally designed by Carol Ross Barney, who's based right here in Chicago and prefers to focus on landscape architecture and architecture for public spaces as opposed to big fancy private buildings. This section of the Riverwalk is called the Fish Hotel. The plants and the planters there attract fish for food and for spawning in this area, and people do fish from the Riverwalk. It is catch and release. It's not recommended to eat anything you catch in the Chicago River, but there is a sustained population of fish, and it's perfectly legal to fish in the Chicago River from the Chicago River Walk. Okay. Now, in front of us and up to the right, ahead of us and up to the right, there is a limestone-clad tower with a big central setback tower in the middle, and it is a great example of postmodern style. Postmodern means mixing past with present. It's got Roman-style arches on the first floor, modern glass and steel, and a Greek temple-inspired roof on top. Past and present, postmodern by Ricardo Bofill. And now for something completely different. To our right is the shorter 55 West Wacker, a great example of brutalism. Brutalist architecture gets its name from the French word brute, meaning raw, referring to the raw appearance of its exterior. It's from 1968 by C.F. Murphy and Associates.
My friend is watching the real house.
Okay. Now directly to our right, I just want to mention that inside this tall, dark tower directly to our right is the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency, which is a company that you might not know by name, but you do know the characters they created, including Ronald McDonald, the Keebler Elf, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, and the Jolly Green Giant, just to name a few. Oh, and Tony the Tiger. That's usually the last one I mentioned. Now, moving on. After this bridge, up and to our right, there is a green tower with a golden spire. Green tower with gold on top. To our right, after this bridge, that is the Carbide and Carbon Building. It's from 1928, designed by the Burnham brothers. It was built during Prohibition, when all alcohol was illegal in the United States. That green tower, tapering up to a decorative golden spire, is meant to resemble a champagne bottle in protest to Prohibition. Now, it is the only building in the city clad with green terracotta, and the gold on top is real gold leaf. Now, right after this bridge, this tall, skinny tower is the Mather Tower, 1929 by Riddle and Riddle. But I'm going to get a drink of water and we'll jump ahead. Because jumping ahead, right in front of us, but on the left side of the river, is the building from whence we came. That white stone building with the clock tower on top ahead of us, the Wrigley Building. The Wrigley Building was finished in 1924, is defined with having an ornate base, a stack of floors, and an ornate French Beaux-Arts style. Now, the Wrigley Building was, of course, originally the home of the Wrigley Company of chewing gum fame, which is still headquartered in Chicago, but no longer in that historic building. And the Wrigley Building is clad with over 300,000 white glazed terracotta tiles. Terracotta is very common and important in Chicago because in the early 1900s, it was cheap to acquire, yet easy to carve into ornate decoration. If you look to our right, and way up high in the background, there is that tall, white, rectangular building, that tall, white, perfect rectangle of a building way up high in the sky directly to our right. That's the Aon Center. The Aon Center was originally the Standard Oil building, built in 1973, designed by Edward Durrell Stone. It was the tallest building in Chicago for 1 year. It's the 4th tallest building in the city today. And Edward Durrell Stone originally clad it entirely with imported Italian Carrara marble. Expensive stuff. It made the whole thing glisten beautifully in the sunlight. But after 9 years, those plates of marble, 3/4 of an inch thick, started to crack and fall to the sidewalk below. The city made the architecture firm reclad it in a sturdier stone, and what we saw today is Carolina granite. Now, the process of replacing the Carrara marble with the Carolina granite cost Edward Durrell Stone's firm $80 million. That was half what it cost to build it in the first place. It was an expensive mistake that goes to show never take marble for granted. Now, here's the thing. That's all true. It's all true. I can admit that my delivery on the joke is sometimes a bit rocky. But it's important to me that you understand that my boss hates that joke. Takes real stones to tell it. Now, in front of us and up to the right, there is a very tall blue glass tower with a bit of a wiggly shape. That's the St. Regis, Chicago. St. Regis, Chicago. The St. Regis was finished in 2020. It is 1,200 feet or 365 meters tall. It's currently the 3rd tallest building in Chicago, and it's currently the tallest building. By polluting it, we were poisoning ourselves. Now, we knew we had to solve this problem, being to make it someone else's problem. Instead of solving the issue, we made the issue flow away from the canal. And at 3 a.m., January 2nd, 1900, we blew up the Chicago River, the dam blowing up. Oh my goodness, we blew up the dam separating the Chicago River from the new canal. So that process, for our feat of engineering, as we were for ourselves, the states of Indiana, Michigan. Well, I guess I got a little behind, and that was a very brief. I am going to just continue right now. Oh, hello. Feel free to finish up those drinks before we get back to the top. Okay. Directly to our right, this curvy, dark steel Lake Point Tower was finished in 1968, designed by Schipperite and Heinrich architects. It is curvilinear international style. It was the tallest residential building in the world when finished, and it's a little lonely. It's the only privately owned building on the east side of Lakeshore Drive. That's because of that public lakefront policy. So technically, the public lakefront wraps around that building, but there's certainly no room to build any neighbors next to it. It used to have neighbors. In front of us and to the right is this brick and green glass residential complex. This brick and green glass residential complex ahead of us to the right is Riverview. It's from 2004 by James DeStefano. Now, right along the riverfront is a row of individual townhomes, each with its own entrance from the Riverwalk. Each is 4 stories tall, and each has a private elevator to its private rooftop terrace. You know, they do sound nice. It is a top secret formula, and the way they do it, they sail a couple boats up and down the main branch of the river. They throw the dye, which is accompanied by drummers and bagpipers. It dyes the whole main branch of the river bright green for about a day, and the dye is left to flow downstream and disperse over the next. That is the London House Hotel. The London House is from 1923 by Alfred Alschuler. It is arts defined with having an ornate base, a stack of floors, and an ornate top to match the base. Now, it also has all those columns on the facade, on the top and the bottom. Those are Corinthian-style columns. Corinthian-style columns have an ornate base, a simple shaft, and an ornate top to match the base. It was Corinthian-style columns that inspired French Beaux-Arts-style architecture as a movement. And remember that the London House Hotel stands on the location where in 1803 Fort Dearborn was built as the U.S. government's first presence in this area, right across the river, the banks of the river in that forested marsh on the shores of Lake Michigan from DuSable's trading post from 1780. Those 2 wooden structures as the beginnings of Chicago 240 years ago. Now, folks, we are approaching our dock, but before we get there, I want to... And there's Michigan Avenue. Or you can go the other way from this dock. You want to go behind us to Wabash Avenue. There are stairs and an elevator.
ตอนนี้เรือก็มาจอดที่เราขึ้นนะคะ ตรงตึกทรัมป์นะ แล้วก็คนก็รอลงเรืออยู่นะ ใช้เวลาก็ประมาณ90 นาทีนะ คนแบบเยอะเต็มลำเลย ก็ถือว่าถ้าใครมาเที่ยวที่ชิคาโกเป็นกิจกรรมที่แบบห้ามพลาดนะคะ คนละประมาณ 1,500 นะมาเที่ยวกันเลย พอเที่ยวนั่งเรือเสร็จนะคะ ตอนนี้กำลังจะไปที่ชิคาโกที่ไชน่าทาวน์นะ ไปหาแบบของกินอร่อยๆกันนะ